We're going to start tonight with an exclusive story by the Sun newspaper. 2 migrants living on the Bibby Stockholm barge have been arrested on suspicion of a sex attack in a bar. The pair, aged 24 and 27, were held after an alleged assault 4 miles from where the controversial floating accommodation is moored. Police received a complaint at the Kika bar in Weymouth on December the 10th. There'll be a little bit more on that story in tomorrow's edition of the Sun newspaper. But first, let's talk to our panel about it. Director of Communications at the Henry Jackson Society, Megan Gittoes, Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant, and journalist Laura Dodsworth. Laura, a breaking story in the Sun tonight. 2 held over a sex attack in a bar. This is what a lot of people in Weymouth were warning would happen if you put a load of men, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what country they originate from, loads of men on a barge with nothing better to do than wander about the town at night. You know, this is going to happen.
Well, well done for the, on the Sun for breaking this. But first, we've got to know it's an alleged assault. We don't actually know what's happened yet. But I don't think it's actually at all fair to men to say if you put a load of men on a barge, they're going to go around attacking and raping women. That's absolute nonsense. Men know how to behave themselves. I do think, though, that the reason that locals had fears is something that, we're not supposed to talk about. It's not politically correct. But if we're really honest, it is well understood by people that if you have a large influx of people from a different cultural and religious background with different attitudes towards women, this kind of thing may happen. Now, where it's not alleged, but we got statistics, is Sweden. Between 2000 and 2015 in Sweden, analysts looked at rapes, attempted rapes and aggravated cases and found that 60% of rapes and attempted rapes were actually committed by foreign-born men, mainly North African. And that was an overrepresentation compared to the population of 2.4. So people don't like talking about what is, called a rape epidemic in Sweden being connected to a new demographic, but it undeniably is. And so that's why locals have got fears in, in towns and cities or even smaller places where there's a big influx of people of different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly the locals who are quoted in the story tonight that we've got in the Sun, which we'll show you later on, are that they've said, if you put a load of people in a place like that, and I'm not suggesting that every man who's in a group with other men would behave like that, but if they're in a sort of, I don't know, dormitory situation or, they're not really being supervised. Also, let's not forget, we don't know who any of these people are.
Yeah.
We don't have any IDs for most of them. They're supposedly having asylum, seeker claims processed. But nobody has a clue who's looking after them. They're apparently allowed to come and go freely as if, everything's fine. It's a recipe for disaster, it seems to me.
The whole setup of the Bibby Stockholm seems a recipe for disaster. A number of things. The fact that they're taken by coach to the town centre where they kind of are then left to do whatever they want all day, which is fine in a principle. But you're right to have raised that point about Sweden. If we're pointing to a massive shift in crime in one demographic, we have to be able to openly have an adult conversation and look into why that is. And we should do that with all things, just as we're doing it later on with food and obesity with the NHS. There is a dangerous trend here, and I'm really worried about social cohesion because is it Dorset?
Yeah.
The protesters are now going to be even more angrier. They're no more reassured, and no one's really stepping in to say, yes, if they are found guilty of this alleged attack, they won't no longer be staying here, because we've known from the past that's not always the case.
Well, you look at what's happening in Ireland, Maddie, and you see there was a hotel burned down. Nobody knows why, but they think it's arson. It wouldn't take a genius to suggest that it might be something to do with people being fed up with migrants being put in hotels. And all this business of taking them on a sort of minibus into town for a bit of a jolly. I mean, they're not supposed to. I mean, where are they getting money from? I mean, are we giving them money to go and spend in nightclubs? I mean, what the hell's going on?
About £40 a week.
Yeah. I mean...
I don't know how many pina coladas that buys you in Weymouth, but I mean, they shouldn't be going out, really, should they?
I don't know. I think that this is a kind of issue where all the kind of the liberal-minded people say, well, it's our duty and we have to help these people, etc. But they never seem to end up in particularly wealthy parts of London and all this stuff. And I think that maybe some of those calling for a more liberal policy on migration and refugees would do well to actually maybe go and see some of these places where communities feel totally overwhelmed. A number of MPs now where they have a lot of refugees living in their particular patch have started to raise these issues in
and that guy in Doncaster who did it the other day got a hell of a pasting. We're just looking, by the way, at the Sun story that we've got there by Nick Parker, exclusive. And we'll have more on it later on. But yeah, I mean...
They get absolutely monstered when they do. But they are reflecting what are very real concerns amongst their
views of their constituents who actually voted them in.
And, you know, this was a very common story also when, after Angela Merkel said refugees welcome, it just led to all kinds of chaos,
there were several situations.
The documented rapes surged, and you know, again, it was a kind of PC-dom that prevented people from talking about it. But it was very, very real, and people knew it was going on.
Yeah, the women who actually came forward in Germany when that happened had to hide their identity to talk about it because they were so worried about what would be said about them. It was that shame that women have when they're raped had all of a sudden been shifted to shame of talking about it, and it was really frightening what had happened there.
And it is unbelievable that we still have to suffer with this kind of officialdom which says, oh, no, you can't talk about that, you know, like you can't identify people, and whenever anyone's arrested, they're called, oh, it's a Swansea man. And you go, really? Is it? Anyway, listen, we've got to move on because we've got lots to talk about tonight, and we're going to be talking more about the Bibby Stockholm, of course, coming up very shortly. Moving on, though, the government's under pressure to explain Baroness Michelle Mone's part in a PPE deal during the pandemic. It comes after she admitted that she lied to the press about her involvement in the scandal. And, of course, there she is, having a whale of a time. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I watched that interview on Laura Kinsberg yesterday morning with a kind of staggering and ever more ridiculous disbelief. You were kind of going... I mean, I know Michelle Mone a little bit because I was in Scotland when she was kind of becoming quite famous and becoming this kind of rather brazen, you know, former kind of ordinary working girl who'd done very well for herself. And, you know, she's always been quite abrasive. She's always been quite, I would say, able to stand up for herself. But that was just kind of total delusionary, wasn't it? It was just like, but I haven't done anything wrong. And you go... You really?
I think two things can be true at once. You know, she has done something wrong, and the lying about it is shocking, but she possibly is also being scapegoated. You know, I think most people understand that when you're in a pandemic, that would create an urgency around procuring goods and services. So we had the so-called VIP lane. But if you think about it, the term is really dodgy, VIP, because MPs and peers could recommend people and companies to go into this VIP lane. And it was found in 2020 that billions of pounds worth of contracts did not go through financial due diligence and the 8-stage checks. There were quite a lot of exposés about it in BMJ in 2020. So this is not the only company. There are others. And we need a lot more
This is actually one of the more respectable
about
ones,
conflicts of interest. And just slightly tangentially, but, you know, related to this, don't forget the SAGE members didn't release their conflicts of interest, financial interest, till 2021, I think, or 2022 even, you know, really late. And she's let the cat out among the pigeons, obviously, with her comment about Rishi Sunak, who, you know, the hedge fund he co-founded, had a significant investment in Moderna. Now, that's run by blind trust, so he doesn't know, you know, what the investment still is, but he did know it was originally invested.
Yes, he did, of course. Sorry, Megan, you wanted to say something as well.
I found it really interesting because, yes, she's right, it's not a crime to lie to the press. And technically, what she's done, as you say, she is one of the more innocent ones in the massive... Is it 15 billion of wasted money on COVID contracts?
Which we're never going to see again,
We're never going to see that money again. And it actually looks like her stuff was total useless because it was the government's fault with the contract. But when she said lying is not a crime, I wanted to shake her. She's so tone deaf. You're a member of the House of Lords. Like, they don't even... Some of those lords do not see the office that they hold. They're a politician. So actually, if we're questioning whether something is a bit off, you are actually supposed to tell the truth about it.
I think this is also, Maddie, the problem with putting people from business into the House of Lords, because people like Michelle Mone are not used to being told that she's wrong. They're not used to being told that, you know, you can't say that, because they've been running companies all their lives and where they've been in charge. And so anybody that doesn't agree with her gets shoved out the door, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, ever since the House of Lords reform came in, you know, you say what you want about the hereditary peers, but perhaps there wasn't quite that level of often brazen political cronyism. You know, they were there for a reason that was to do with the their connection with an area. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily go back to the full hereditary peers, but there is an awful lot of really kind of grubby appointments that have happened ever since.
Yeah. We used to call it sharp practice, where you
Yeah.
would kind of go, well, that's a bit kind of dodgy.
Oh, and you know, they're all at it. Keir Starmer was saying that he wanted to reform the House of Lords, and he keeps putting more and more people in there.
Right.
Basically, I think every politician is now too invested in the system as it currently is. The Lib Dems aren't going to change it because they have so many peers in the House of Lords that they have, like, really out of all proportion to their political power.
Which is why the House of Lords has ceased to be quite as useful as it used to be, because now it's just a kind of a stopping measure, isn't it, for anything that they perceive to be right-wing, which is basically everything. So they just stop all of it. But the other interesting bit is they've made changes to the laws about suspending and or, you know, firing people, but they still can't really get rid of anyone. Because I remember the case of Lord Watson, who set fire to the curtains at Prestonfield Hotel. The reasons for which vary depending on who you talk to, but he was basically refused a drink after a big, long dinner. And he thought it'd be a great idea to set fire to the curtains. And unfortunately for him, he was caught on CCTV, went to jail for arson, but then came straight back out into the House of Lords.
No, but you can get rid of people. You just can't get rid of them posthumously, like Sir Jimmy Savile. But, you know, Mona's, she's a David Cameron appointment, isn't she?
Yeah.
Because he put his hairdresser
No, but you
into
can't.
the House
Yeah, but
of Lords.
there is no mechanism by which you can actually fire anyone from the House of Lords. It can't be done.
Not breaking the code of conduct?
Well, yeah, but what is that? Have you seen it? Is it written down?
Yes,
no,
I think so.
It's
Isn't
not.
it?
Yeah, and it's so loose, and I hope this now triggers a conversation that we all need to have. A second chamber is essential, but next we need to go for the Lords, who have huge connections to Russian oligarchs. That is something I would like to see happen, because it's actually probably more serious.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, a word in defence of the Lords. I spent a lot of time sketching the Commons, and occasionally I sketch the Lords, and I always feel like the quality of the debate is significantly higher, and they really, if they're on a committee, they know their stuff a lot better than the equivalent Commons one. I think we would miss it.
But it's a very minuscule number, isn't it? It's a minuscule
Yeah.
number of Lords who actually attend those kinds of
Oh, yeah,
debates.
yeah,
If what you could say to them is, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll work it on, and we'll thin the place out. Based on how often you've actually appeared in the last year.
Well, I think you don't get paid.
You don't get paid if you don't turn up. So that sort of is a way of filtering it out. There's kind of you have to turn up.
But you have to turn up, and you should have to then be in the debate.
Yeah, totally.
Rather than just turning up and leaving, which is what some of them used to do.
That's true.
I found it very.
You can't not attend for 6 months.
No.
I think that's one of the grounds for leaving the Lords.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, I find it very weird. I mean, I've now got 3 friends in the House of Lords, which is quite weird. And when you go down there and they refer to them as my lady and my lord, it's all a bit weird. And one of them, who's actually the first Minister of Scotland, Jack McConnell, I came in and I said, do I have to call you Lord Jack now? And he went, no, it's fine. I was like, I'm joking. I wasn't going to call you Lord Jack, actually. You know, that's not going to happen. But let me do a few of these messages that we've got. Should Michelle Murd be stripped of her peerage? Dell says, yes, in fact, this proves the Lords are an expensive waste of money. Privileges for doubtful services tended to those in power. Disgusting. Alice says, no, there are loads of crooked men in the Lords, even some who have been to prison. So why should she be penalised? Get rid of the whole rotten bunch and let us vote in a smaller, more effective upper house. Well, I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that she's a woman, she's doing what Gary Lineker's doing to the BBC, to the House of Lords. She's making everybody think this is what it's like, especially if you're a Tory peer. You're just in there to make a load of money.
Well, the thing is, I mean, obviously, this had been talked about a lot, but were it not for the absolutely catastrophic interview that she gave, we wouldn't be talking about it now. It's kind of like the equivalent of the Prince Andrew interview with News.
It really is.
It's really shooting us up.
Who advises these people?
I think before this, perhaps people were seeing this as a kind of sort of Captain Tom-ish situation.
Yeah.
More serious, for sure. But it wasn't really on the agenda so much.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean, I can see how she could make the point that we were just doing what we thought was the right thing to do. And of course we made money because that's what our business does and that's what everybody else does. And his argument, the husband, was, well, other people were charging for their PPE as well. And so I'm not quite on the side of those sort of fundamentalist socialist types who say they shouldn't have been making any money during the pandemic. Because you've got to pay people, you've got to pay for people who work for you and all of that. But it's just 60 million quid. It seems like a bit
From
much.
a contract worth 200 million. That's,
This is the tip of the iceberg. So I come back to the first point I was making about all of the financial interests. You know, I remember raising with a couple of MPs quite early in 2020 about to what extent they thought disaster capitalism was rearing its head. And there was a real reticence to call it that because, you know, there's a sort of a cynical view that after a war or an environmental disasters, companies go into profit or bad actors go into push policies that they can get away with. And in a pandemic, we're all supposed to be in it together. But it was just completely obvious that companies would swoop in to make profits. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. Right. I mean, don't tell me pharmaceutical companies didn't have huge billion-dollar signs in front of their eyes. Right. Well, I think we need a lot more transparency.
I mean, they didn't give the COVID vaccine away for free, did they?
No, about which we still don't know. We haven't seen the contracts. Right. The contracts are secret. And we need to know a lot more about which MPs and peers put companies onto the VIP lane, you know, the chumocracy conveyor belt. We need to get to the bottom of all of this.
Well, didn't Matt Hancock give his pub landlord some kind of contract or other?
Yeah, well, like a brother-in-law or sister-in-law or something.
Yeah.
And Michael Gove, David Mellor. He put David Mellor onto the VIP lane, didn't he?
To be fair, I mean, I think Kate Bingham might have been one of these people too. They didn't all end badly. That was, you know, in an emergency. I sort of think it can be conducted in an extremely dodgy way, but there's nothing inherently wrong with saying to people, if you know someone who has a particular expertise in this area that you think would be good, we're trying to deal with this extraordinary emergency.
But that was when you wouldn't expect somebody to go, I know a woman that makes really great lingerie, so she can provide some PPE for people.
Exactly, but Laura...
Might be a bit racy, but, you know, what's the problem?
I think that Laura makes such a brilliant point that part of the problem was also just that every kind of normal scrutiny slowed down. Yeah. Journalists were not asking the right questions. Everything became sort of like a bit North Korea-esque. Everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, I blame Peston and his ilk for all that. I mean, they were just hopeless and nobody else could get a look in.
Yeah, journalists were just kind of seen as if they did ask questions or did ask what something meant with their children, with children's schooling or their grandparents in homes, they were just seen as non-believers, and you didn't want you didn't want to lock down, and you didn't want to have restrictions. You were trying to kill people.
I know, it was awful. Awful, absolutely awful. So, well, listen, very spirited to begin with. Thank you.